I'm Joe Herbert, your Erie real estate agent, and today I'm doing an educational video on the purchase agreement, and I want to talk about the key dates in the purchase agreement. Every real estate transaction has a purchase agreement. Doesn't matter whether you're selling your home or if you're buying a home, the buyer's realtor is going to create a purchase agreement. They're going to put what's the offer price, the deposit, is it contingent on inspections, is it contingent on financing, when is the closing date? I get asked all the time by people who are working with realtors other than me, what's going on with their transaction? And I ask them, well, what does your purchase agreement say? And they say, I don't know, I didn't even get a copy of it, which blows my mind. But what I do is when I'm working with a buyer or a seller, and if I'm working with the buyer, they get a house under agreement, or if I'm working with the seller and their house goes under agreement, I immediately summarize these dates and send it to my client so they know what has to be done and when it has to be done by. So today I want to talk about what are the key dates in the purchase agreement. So right here, yep, important dates in your purchase agreement. So the very first date is the execution date. That's when both parties agree to all the terms. They're happy with the price, the deposit, the closing date, the contingencies. Both parties sign that agreement and both parties get a copy. That's the execution date. Everything kind of runs off of that date. And I'll give you an example. Typically, the buyer will have 5 days to submit a deposit. So let's say it's a $5,000 deposit. They'll have 5 days to write that deposit check. And typically, not always, in our market here in Erie County, the check gets written to the seller's broker, and the seller's broker puts that in an escrow account. So let's just say, I'm gonna write a date here so we can do this. Let's say that your house goes under agreement on February 1st of 2025, okay? And it doesn't matter really whether the seller or the buyer. Let's say on that date, everybody signed the agreement and got a copy. And let's say that the deposit is due within 5 days. So that, and by the way, all these dates start, the clock starts ticking the first full calendar day after the execution date. So if you have 5 days as a buyer to submit your deposit, that's February 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. So by the end of the day, on February 6th, right here, that buyer had better hand in the deposit. If they don't, they're in violation. They're in default of the agreement, okay? So if I'm representing the buyer, you know on February 5th, I'm going to be calling them going, hey, I didn't get that deposit check yet. And if I'm representing the seller, I'm calling the buyer's realtor saying, hey, where's the deposit check? So I like to track these dates without having to look into a 25-page agreement to remind me what they are. And I do. I track these in software, and I send copies of them to my client. So let's talk about the loan application date. That's usually the next one, if the offer is contingent on financing. So let's just say that the buyer has 7 days now to go apply for a mortgage, right? Well, 7 days, that means by February 8th, they better have applied for their loan. So again, if I'm working with the buyer, I'm going to be on the phone with the buyer and their lender saying, hey, has the application been sent in to the lender? Inspection completion date. That's the date that if the offer is contingent on a home inspection, that means the buyer has to get into the house, do the inspection with their inspector, and reply to the seller if they want the price changed or something fixed, or if they decide they don't want to buy it, right? So let's say you have 14 days to get that inspection done. So that means by February 15th, the buyer's got to get their inspections done and reply in writing if they're not happy, right? Now, this loan approval commitment date, that's usually a hard-coded date. It's not a number of days. But again, this is the date that the lender has to get all the information, all the financial information from the buyer, order the appraisal, make sure everything is right, and issue some kind of a letter or email saying the loan is approved. We're going to loan this money. And typically that might be 30 days, let's say, okay? So let's just say we hard-coded in there March 1st, right? So that's in my list. So if all this other stuff has been done, I'm calling the lender here a few days before March 1st and saying, hey, we got the commitment letter. When is the, are we going to close on time, right? And if we're not, I want to know, because we may need to extend that date, okay? And then last but not least, we have our closing or settlement date. And so typically, again, that's a hard-coded date, okay? So if I'm going to write an offer and it's going to get accepted on the 1st, I might put 45 days until closing. So let's just say that's hard-coded for March 15th. So again, I'm listing each one of these timelines and what the date is in my software so I can track them, and I'm sending a copy to my client. Because I don't want my client to have to flip through a 25-page purchase agreement to figure out what's going on. That's my job, to track this stuff and keep them abreast of whether everything is going as planned. So these are the key dates in a purchase agreement. Execution date, that's the date both parties agree, sign, and get copies. The deposit due date, that's the date the buyer has to submit their deposit. Loan application date, the buyer has to make application to a lender on or before this date. Inspection completion date, the buyer has to get their inspections done on or before that date and reply in writing. Loan has to be approved in writing by the lender by this date, and we need to close on or before that date. So those are the key dates in a purchase agreement. If you have any questions, feel free to call me. I'm Joe Herbert, your Erie real estate agent, 814-602-6181. Thanks for watching.